What would you do if you stumbled upon a strange restaurant that only opens at midnight with no menu and meals chosen based on the sins of your past? The Restaurant Without a Menu is a spine-chilling horror story about guilt, memory, and the price we pay when the truth is finally served. Follow Evelyn and Jonathan as they descend into a nightmarish world where every dish is tailored to their deepest regrets, and there's no such thing as leftovers. If you love immersive horror stories that linger in your mind long after the video ends, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to stay updated in our next unsettling tale. Rain painted the city in streaks of silver, whispering across the windows like fingers tracing forgotten names. On a forgotten street, tucked between a boarded-up pawn shop and an abandoned cinema with a flickering marquee, stood a restaurant that didn't appear on any map. Its sign was a single lantern, swaying gently in the wind, casting a circle of amber light onto the rain-slick sidewalk. It was called La Fin Gourmande. No menu, no reservations, no walk-ins before midnight. Jonathan Hale had never seen it before. He wasn't lost, not exactly. The cab driver had taken a wrong turn, apologized, then disappeared down an alley when Jonathan stepped out to smoke. That was 30 minutes ago. Now his phone was dead, the rain was relentless, and the only place with light was this strange little restaurant that shouldn't exist. The windows were blacked out, no glow from within, no movement behind the glass. But there was a sign on the door, scrawled in faded white chalk. "We open when the clock bleeds." Jonathan exhaled, the smoke from his last cigarette mingling with the fog in his breath. The phrase meant nothing. Or maybe it meant everything. His fingers itched as he reached for the brass doorknob, slick and cold, shaped like a human tongue. The door creaked open. It didn't feel like stepping inside. It felt like falling inward. The air was warm, but not inviting. It smelled of spices and something metallic, like old blood steeped in rosemary. Candles lined the hallway, their flames dancing to a rhythm no one else could hear. Jonathan hesitated. The floor beneath his feet wasn't wood. It was bone-white tile, veined like marble, but soft enough to muffle his steps. A low chime echoed from within, but there was no bell in sight. He walked further in, past a wall of mismatched mirrors. Each reflection shimmered with a subtle delay. In one of them, his reflection smiled a fraction too long. In another, it looked straight at him, even after he turned away. The dining room revealed itself like a stage being slowly unveiled. One long table stood in the center, draped in velvet, darker than night. At the head of the table sat a figure in a white tuxedo, face obscured by shadows. Beside him, an empty chair, pulled out as if waiting. Jonathan stepped forward. The room was silent, unnaturally so. No hum of ventilation, no patter of rain beyond the walls. Just silence thick enough to choke on. His shoes made no sound. Even his breath seemed muffled. The figure gestured, one graceful motion of a gloved hand. Jonathan sat. The chair welcomed him like an old lover. "I," Jonathan began, but stopped. The man across the table held up a single finger, motioning for quiet. His face remained hidden, the flickering candlelight never touching it. From the side, a door slid open without sound. A woman stepped through. Her skin was pale as milk, her eyes entirely black. She wore an apron stained with something too dark to be wine. In her hands, a silver tray. On it, a cloche. She placed it before Jonathan, bowed without words, and left. He stared at the dome. The silver gleamed, but there was a dark smear along the base. It looked recent. "Here," the man said finally, voice smooth as silk, soaked in oil. "You do not order. You are served. What suits you? What your past has earned." Jonathan blinked. "I don't understand," he muttered. "You will," came the reply, soft and certain. He lifted the lid. The scent hit first. Not rot, not meat. It was memory. It smelled like an autumn night 20 years ago, like wet leaves, like the fire that burned down his father's shed, like the ash that rained afterward. On the plate was a single object, a scorched photograph. Jonathan's breath caught. It was him, a boy of 10. In the background, flames consuming the shed. His father's shadow frozen in the doorway. A second figure, small, crumpled, lying at the boy's feet. He had forgotten that night. No, he had buried it. The waiter returned, this time with a tall glass. The liquid inside shimmered like liquid moonlight. No explanation, no question. Drink it. The urge was overwhelming. He lifted the glass. It was warm. It tasted of rust and remorse. And suddenly he remembered. The girl, his cousin, Sarah. She had screamed. He hadn't meant to lock the door. He was just playing. But the gasoline, the match, it was all too fast. Jonathan dropped the glass. It shattered silently. No sound. Only a single sharp breath from behind him. A child's whisper. "Why did you leave me?" He spun around. No one there. When he turned back, the figure in the tuxedo was gone. So was the table. The room had changed. Now he was alone in a kitchen. Pots hanging from hooks, but they dripped red. The knives in the block were twitching. The refrigerator door opened slowly, by itself. Inside was another tray, another cloche. This time he didn't wait. He opened it. Inside was a tongue, his own by the look of it. Tattooed across the muscle were the words, "Your silence fed the fire." Jonathan screamed, but no sound came out. And from somewhere deep in the restaurant's bowels, someone else laughed. The kind of laugh that's wet and broken, like lungs full of water. It echoed through the walls, bounced off the tile, burrowed into his spine. The lights dimmed. A bell rang. He was back at the entrance. The door stood open again, and beyond it, the night was still raining. The sign had changed. Now it read, "Open only to those who've tasted truth." Jonathan stumbled out. The door closed behind him. When he turned to look, the building was gone. No lantern, no windows, only a blank wall where a restaurant had once stood. In his pocket, something warm. He pulled it out, the scorched photograph. Only this time, he wasn't in it. Only the fire and the girl, smiling. The rain hadn't stopped. It fell in a steady whisper, hissing softly against the windshield as Evelyn Harrow stared through the glass. Her knuckles white on the steering wheel. The wiper swept back and forth with a slow, rhythmic groan, like something breathing in its sleep. She had been driving for nearly an hour, but the streets didn't look familiar. The city felt different. The buildings leaned a little too close. The streetlights flickered in patterns that didn't match the wind. Her GPS had gone black 20 minutes ago. When she tried to call Jonathan, the line clicked, then looped back with a recording of her own voice, distorted and slow, whispering her name like a prayer. She parked on a street that didn't have a name. The restaurant stood at the corner, nestled in the crook of two crumbling buildings, just like he described it. No sign, only a lantern, swaying on its hook, casting a sickly yellow glow. She checked the time, 11:59. The moment the clock on her dashboard flipped to 12, the door opened by itself. A gust of warm, stale air flowed out. It carried a scent like old wood, burnt herbs, and something too sweet. Something rotting beneath sugar and smoke. She stepped inside. The door shut behind her with a sound like bones snapping. Evelyn flinched. The hallway ahead was narrow and dim. Candles lined the walls, their flames steady despite the draft. Her boots made no sound on the floor, which looked like black stone but gave slightly, like flesh beneath fabric. Ahead, a mirror waited. She slowed. Her reflection stared back, but something was wrong. It wasn't her eyes, not exactly. They were the same color, the same shape, but in the reflection, they didn't blink when she did. They stared, wide and unblinking, the pupils dilated until no iris remained. Her reflection smiled, then licked its lips. She turned away quickly and walked into the dining room. The long table was set again, this time with 8 chairs. Only one was occupied. A woman sat at the far end. Her face was hidden beneath a wide-brimmed hat, veil trailing over the table like spider silk. She wore a red dress that shimmered with something wet. Her hands, gloved in lace, tapped slowly on the surface. Tap, tap, tap. In a rhythm that echoed in Evelyn's chest like a second heartbeat. She didn't speak. Evelyn approached and took the seat closest to her. One by one, the candles above the table flared to life, casting trembling shadows across the velvet tablecloth. The cutlery gleamed. The plates were bone-white and empty. The waiter returned. Not the same one Jonathan had described. This one was tall, far too tall. His limbs were long and bent at odd angles, as though he had been folded wrong and stitched back together. His face was hidden behind a cloth mask, stained at the mouth. He carried a tray covered with a black cloth. Without a word, he set it before Evelyn. She hesitated. The waiter didn't move. Neither did the woman at the end of the table. The silence pressed in. It was thick. Alive, it clawed at Evelyn's throat, urging her to break it. "What is this?" she asked, her voice hushed. No reply. She lifted the cloth. Beneath it was a plate. On the plate was a glass bell jar. Inside the jar, a wedding ring. Her heart stopped. It was her mother's, the one they had buried with her. Her hands began to shake. From beneath the table, something brushed against her ankle. Cold, wet, she yanked her fear back. A whisper followed. Not a voice, a memory. "You should have come home sooner," Evelyn gasped. The candle nearest her flared violently, the flame stretching upward into a thin scream of light before it snapped and went out. The air grew colder. The woman in the red dress finally moved. She turned her head slowly, just enough for the veil to shift. Evelyn saw her mouth. It was sewn shut. The stitches pulsed with something black and wet, like worms writhing in old thread. She opened her mouth wider, despite the stitches, and from the torn edges came a sound. Not quite a scream, not quite a sob. It was something in between. A sound born in grief and buried in regret. The walls shuddered, plates rattled. A second tray appeared beside Evelyn, though no one had carried it in. This time, no cover. It held a bowl. Inside was a pale stew, thick with something floating near the top. Paper, soaked and curling. She leaned in. They were photographs of her. Moments she didn't remember. Moments she couldn't have remembered. There she was, watching the window on the night her mother died. Another photo showed her walking away, while someone lay collapsed behind her. A man with blood on his shirt, her father. The stew began to bubble. A low, wet, gurgling sound filled the room, rising in pitch. The smell changed. Charred paper, burned hair. A sickly sweetness, like syrup oiled too long. Evelyn turned away, but the bowl followed her. The table shifted, crawling forward. "You didn't listen," a voice whispered behind her ear. She spun around. No one was there. The dining room was gone. Now she stood in a field. Tall grass, swaying without wind. The sky was black, starless. A single figure stood in the distance, facing away. Long black hair, bare feet, white dress soaked in something dark. Evelyn took a step forward. The grass rustled, whispered. Each blade cut her ankles. She kept moving. The figure turned. It was her mother, but her eyes were empty, no whites. No pupils, just sockets filled with moving shadows. "You left me in the dark," she said. "No," Evelyn whispered. "I tried to come back." "You waited too long. Now eat." The ground opened beneath her. She fell. The wind howled like teeth grinding. Her screams were swallowed whole, and then silence. She sat at the table once more. The bowl was empty now. The waiter stood behind her, holding a napkin. He handed it to her. It was damp. When she opened it, words were scrawled in something thick and red. "Guilt is best served warm." The woman in the red dress was gone. The chairs were empty. Only the candle in front of her remained. It flickered once, twice, then went out. The door opened behind her with a creak like ribs splitting. She stood and walked out, back onto the street. The rain had stopped. The lantern was gone. The building behind her, brick and grime. No sign of a restaurant. In her hand, the ring, still warm, still wet. The fog was thicker tonight. It rolled in over the city like a living thing, swallowing the sidewalks and dimming the flicker of street lamps into smudges of gold. Jonathan Hale stood motionless in the parking lot behind his apartment, staring at the soot-colored sky. His breath curled in front of him like ghostly script, vanishing before it could be read. The photograph in his pocket weighed more than it should have. He had tried to forget. Tried to dismiss the memory of La Fin Gourmande as a fever dream, an illusion crafted by exhaustion, grief, and guilt. But the photograph had followed him home. When he left it on the kitchen counter, it reappeared on his pillow. When he burned it in the sink, he found the ashes reassembled on his doorstep, edges singed and curling, but whole. And the whispers had started, not always loud, not always clear, but always there. Murmurs in the plumbing, clicks in the walls, soft syllables breathed into his ear just as he was about to fall asleep. Tonight, they were louder. He turned back toward his apartment and froze. A figure stood at the far end of the hallway. Not a shadow, a man, tall, thin, wearing a dark suit with a napkin draped over one arm. A waiter. Jonathan's mouth went dry. The man took a single step forward. The sound was delicate, leather against tile. Tap. He took another. Tap. Jonathan backed away, but the hallway stretched behind him like taffy. The distance to the door doubled, tripled. The exit pulsed with a red light, heart beat slow. The waiter's face was pale, not unnaturally so, but unfinished, as if it had been sculpted halfway and left wet. His eyes were the wrong kind of calm, not serene, just empty. He raised one hand, slowly, and gestured toward the stairwell. Jonathan didn't want to follow, but his legs moved. The stairs spiraled downward into darkness. The walls pressed in. The air grew moist and thick, tinged with mildew and rust. With every step, the sounds around him changed. The soft hum of electricity vanished. His phone lost signal. The stairwell groaned, and from below, the sound of plates, clinking, being set. He descended. At the bottom, a door waited, wooden, carved with symbols he couldn't understand. The handle was shaped like a vertebra. The waiter reached it first. He opened the door without looking back. Inside was the dining room again. Same long table, same velvet drape, same impossible warmth. But tonight, there were 3 other guests. To Jonathan's left, a boy no older than 12, pale, mute, his eyes locked on something far away. To his right, an elderly woman, skin like paper, twitching with each tick of an invisible clock. Across the table, Evelyn. She looked up. Their eyes met. Neither spoke. The waiter appeared beside them, silent, gliding, always present. He placed a tray in front of the boy, a small silver plate. On it, a dead bird. Eyes open, beak broken, its wings sewn together with human hair. The boy didn't flinch. He reached for the knife. Jonathan turned away. Bile rising. The woman's tray came next. On it, an old-fashioned music box, cracked down the center. When she opened it, a lullaby began to play, twisted and slow, off-key. Her mouth fell open, trembling. She whispered, "I told her to hush. only for a moment, just for peace, and began to sob. The waiter moved to Evelyn. Her tray held a single silver spoon, polished to a mirror. When she looked into it, her face warped, stretched by something unseen. She dropped it with a cry. Jonathan tried to rise, but the waiter was already in front of him. His tray was empty, except for a folded napkin. Jonathan unfolded it with trembling fingers. Inside, a key, simple, rusted, but something about it made his blood run cold. He looked up at the waiter. "Where does it go?" he asked. The waiter smiled, not with his mouth, with his eyes. Something twitched beneath his skin like worms in a sack. "You already know," he whispered. The room darkened. The guests were gone. Only Jonathan remained, and the door behind him had changed. It was no longer the stairwell. It was a door from his past. He knew it. The basement. The one from the house he grew up in. The one they never opened after what happened to his brother. The key trembled in his hand. The knob fit perfectly. He opened it and stepped into the dark. It was colder here. The air stung like needles. The sound of dripping water echoed in endless loops. He took slow steps down. At the bottom was a chair, a small one, for a child, and in it sat a skeleton, still dressed in pajamas. A comic book clutched in bone-thin fingers. Jonathan's breath hitched. He remembered now, the game. Hide and seek. He had locked the door from the outside as a joke, then forgotten. He backed away, but the waiter was there again, hand extended, a plate in his palm. On it, a tooth. His brother's. Jonathan fell to his knees. Somewhere far above, a bell rang. He was back in the dining room, alone. His tray gone, his chair empty. The waiter stood at the head of the table now and spoke. "One dish per sin, one memory at a time. Eat or be eaten by it." Jonathan closed his eyes, and the whispers returned, louder this time. Every one of them saying his name. The scream wasn't hers, but it lived in Evelyn's throat. It had been echoing ever since she left the restaurant. 3 nights had passed since the ring appeared in her hand. She hadn't slept. She hadn't eaten. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the table. The woman in red. The bowl of soup with photographs floating like drowned memories. She had burned the ring. It reappeared on her bedside table. She'd flushed it. It clinked inside her coffee mug the next morning. And now she could smell the restaurant again. Even here, standing in her apartment, the scent wafted in from the hallway. Burnt rosemary, wet wood, sweet decay. The doorknob was cold under her hand. She hadn't intended to leave, but her feet moved, guided by something deeper than thought. Something summoned. The hallway stretched as if the building had grown overnight. Each step echoed louder than the last. The elevator was gone. Just gone. In its place, a stairwell she had never seen before. No numbers on the door. No signs on the wall. Only the faint sound of silverware clinking. A fork against porcelain. A knife dragging slow across bone. She descended. The steps spiraled into a narrow shaft of shadow. The lights flickered above her, buzzing with static, like angry flies. With each step, the temperature dropped. The shadows deepened. Her ears popped as though descending into deep water. Then she saw it, the door. That same door carved with symbols she didn't recognize. That same vertebra-shaped handle. She pushed it open and found herself inside again. The dining room was waiting, but this time it had changed. The table was smaller, circular, surrounded by 4 chairs. She recognized 2 of the people seated there. Jonathan, pale, hollow-eyed, a sheen of sweat on his brow. The boy from before, mouth sewn shut with threads so tight it had begun to tear the corners of his lips. And a new figure, an old man with skin like melted wax. His eyes were gone, sockets filled with a thick black tar that pulsed in time with his heartbeat. His fingers trembled, one hand cradling a spoon that dripped with something red and warm. No one spoke. She sat in the empty chair, and the plates appeared, not served, not placed, just there. Before each of them, a covered dish, silver domes fogged from within. A voice rang out, soft, velvet-wrapped glass. You may not choose what you're served. The waiter stepped forward from the shadows. His mask was gone. What remained was a face of smooth porcelain. No features, only 2 thin slits for eyes and a mouth drawn in charcoal, stretched too wide. Choice is an illusion, he continued, tone cold and certain. You are not guests. You are ingredients, marinated in guilt. He removed the lid from Evelyn's plate. A heart, human, still beating. But it wasn't fresh. It was shriveled, dry. Black veins crawled across the muscle like roots. With every pulse, a low thud echoed through the room. She couldn't move. She couldn't look away. It was her mother's. She knew it, not from logic, not from memory, but from that deep, primal knowing that lives in bones and blood. Eat, the waiter said. I can't, she whispered. The waiter leaned closer. You already have. And the heart split open. Inside was a photograph, burned at the edges. It showed Evelyn as a child, sitting on the porch with her mother, smiling. But in the background, unnoticed until now, was a figure. A man with a camera. She remembered him. He used to follow them, linger at corners, sometimes wait outside the school. Her mother had told her to smile, to never cry, to always act normal. Even when she knew something was wrong, the man had vanished one day. No investigation, no reports. But Evelyn knew. Her mother had taken care of it, and now here was the proof. Something inside the heart moved again, a second pulse. This time, a whisper. You said nothing. Evelyn choked back a sob. The heart fell to the plate, oozing black fluid that hissed as it touched the porcelain. Jonathan's plate opened next. A mirror, but not his face. Inside was his brother's, mouth open, screaming, over and over. But there was no sound. Only the scrape of nails on glass, the echo of dripping water, the wet rasp of lungs gasping long after breath had left them. The boy's plate revealed a bell jar, inside a baby bird, alive, flapping, its wings broken, pinned. The boy didn't cry, he only stared. And the old man's plate, nothing. He leaned forward. A whisper emerged from his throat, dry as paper. "I ate already." The waiter nodded. "And still you hunger." Suddenly the lights flickered, the room shook, the candles dimmed, and from the corners of the ceiling, laughter. Low, guttural, wet, like someone laughing through a mouthful of broken teeth. The shadows around the room twisted, pulled inward. The table began to sink, slowly descending into blackness, like a ship swallowed by tar. "Where are we going?" Jonathan asked. The waiter smiled. "This course is over." The room collapsed. The darkness swallowed them whole. And above the void, the sound of a single fork falling, clattering, spinning, until it stopped, cold, final, and silence returned. The first thing Evelyn noticed was the sound, a soft dripping. It echoed in the dark like water falling from a great height, but each drop landed with a thud, too heavy to be liquid. It was followed by a faint rustle, like paper dragging across a stone floor, or something dry and thin crawling just out of sight. She opened her eyes. There was no dining room now, no table, no velvet cloth or flickering candles. She lay on the cold floor of a narrow corridor. The walls damp and breathing, not figuratively, actually breathing. They expanded and contracted in slow rhythmic pulses, and each exhale carried the scent of mold, wet copper, and forgotten rot. Jonathan sat against the far wall, clutching something in his lap. His fingers were bleeding. He didn't seem to notice. She crawled toward him. "Jonathan, what happened?" He didn't answer. Instead, he held out what he was cradling. It was a book, leather-bound, old. The cover was soft like worn skin and faintly warm to the touch. Burnt letters were carved into it. The menu. Evelyn recoiled. Jonathan looked up. His eyes had changed. No longer just tired or afraid. They were empty now, hollowed. "They want us to remember," he whispered. "And they feed us until we do." She looked around. The corridor stretched infinitely in both directions. No doors, no windows, just walls that pulsed like lungs, and a floor that felt too soft beneath her hands. She stood, wobbling. Her limbs ached with exhaustion. Her mind buzzed with a low hum, the same frequency of dread. The sound returned. Clink, a fork on china. Closer now. She turned. At the far end of the corridor, a light flickered into life, warm, inviting, deceitful. Evelyn began walking toward it. Jonathan followed. Their footsteps made no sound, but something else moved with them. A low scuttling, just beneath the surface of the floor. The corridor opened into another room. A dining space again, but this one was different, circular. The walls were mirrors, dozens of them, each reflecting slightly different versions of the room. In one, Evelyn wasn't moving. In another, she was bleeding from the eyes. In yet another, she was missing entirely. In the center stood a table with no chairs. Instead, there was a single high chair, a child's. On it sat a plate, and on that plate, her old diary, the one she had burned in college. the one she thought was lost in ash and smoke. She reached for it. Jonathan grabbed her wrist. "Don't," he warned. But it was too late. Her fingers brushed the leather cover. It opened by itself. The pages flipped, faster and faster, each one slapping the air with a noise like skin meeting flesh. Then it stopped. A single page, a single entry. "I saw him die, and I said nothing." Her breath caught. It had been her freshman year. She'd witnessed the drowning behind the gym, one of the older students who'd fallen through the ice. She had seen it, watched it happen, and walked away. The page began to bleed. Thick black ink poured from the words, dripping onto the table, forming a pool that slithered toward her boots. The diary closed. And the waiter stepped out from the reflection. He emerged not from the room, but from the mirror behind them. One leg at a time, his body unfolding like paper soaked in water, joints popping in reverse. He did not speak. He only raised a silver lid that appeared in his hand. Beneath it, a bowl of soup, clear broth, steaming slightly. Floating on the surface, human teeth. Dozens of them, all baby teeth. Evelyn backed away, but behind her, the room had shifted again. No door, only mirrors. Now they showed her face, multiplied and twisted, each one with a different expression. Fear, rage, guilt, hunger. Jonathan screamed. She turned. ... He had fallen. The book was open again, and from it rose smoke. And voices, children's voices, laughing, mocking. "You didn't help him. You left us. You watched it burn." Evelyn covered her ears. But the voices were inside her now. They lived in her breath, in her blood. The room darkened, and the waiter moved closer. He held out a spoon. One of the baby teeth was resting in it. Still warm, still wet. "You must taste what you buried," he said. The walls pulsed faster now, louder, a heartbeat out of sync with hers. "No," she whispered. "Please, no more." The waiter didn't move. Eat or be eaten. A force seized her wrist. She didn't know if it was Jonathan or the room itself. Her hand lifted. The spoon moved toward her lips. The smell hit her first. Not of metal, but of childhood. A playground in winter. The taste of silence and shame. The spoon touched her tongue, and the world shattered. The mirrors cracked, not outward, but inward, as if something was pushing from the other side. The sound was deafening, glass screaming, metal bending, bones grinding. Then silence. She was back in the corridor, alone. Jonathan was gone. The book was gone. The only thing that remained was the spoon, still wet, still warm, and behind her, from the shadows, the sound of slow, deliberate clapping. 1, 2, 3. Then a voice, "Well done." The waiter stepped forward, smiling now. But it wasn't a smile of joy. It was the smile of something ancient. Something that had fed for a very long time. On to the next course. Jonathan awoke to the sound of chewing. Wet, deliberate, close. He didn't move. The darkness around him was thick and damp, like a blanket soaked in breath and rot. Something soft pressed against his cheek. The floor was not stone or wood. It was warm and it pulsed, slow, subtle, like a massive creature sleeping just beneath the surface. The chewing stopped. Then, a slow swallow, a breath. Jonathan sat up. He was in a small, circular room. No doors, no windows. Just walls covered in faint scratch marks and handprints, smeared like something tried to climb out or in. The ceiling was impossibly high, vanishing into black. A single light flickered above him, swinging from a frayed cord like a hanged man. It didn't glow so much as it shivered with light, trembling at the edge of failure. In front of him sat a table, not large, square, metal. And across from him, a boy. The same boy from the earlier meal. Still silent, mouth still sewn shut. But now his eyes followed Jonathan with hunger. Not the kind born from starvation, but something darker. A craving for pain, for consequence. Between them was a plate, covered by a tarnished silver cloche. Jonathan didn't reach for it. He didn't have to. The boy did it for him. Tiny, pale fingers lifted the lid. There was no food, only a jawbone, human, bloodied. 2 teeth still embedded. A tag was looped around one of them with old, frayed string. The name was his own. Jonathan recoiled. No! The boy didn't react. Instead, he picked up a fork, a knife. He tilted his head, staring at the bone like it was a puzzle or an invitation. "I didn't mean to kill him," Jonathan said quietly. "It was an accident. I was just a kid." The boy lifted the knife. Jonathan slammed his hand on the table. "Stop it." But the boy didn't stop. He began sawing, slow, deliberate. The sound of metal on bone screeched through the room. Sparks danced across the surface of the plate. The bone began to crack. Jonathan felt it in his own jaw. Pressure, ache, a dull, rising pain that crawled into his teeth. "I tried to forget," he whispered. "That doesn't mean I deserved this." A voice answered him from the shadows. "Yes, it does." The waiter stepped into the light. But this time, he was different. No longer masked. His face was a patchwork of others. Lips from one man, nose from another. A stitched-together nightmare of stolen expressions. His eyes were hollow sockets filled with crawling maggots, writhing in rhythm with his words. "We do not serve justice. We serve memory. Regret. What rots inside must be eaten, or it will eat you instead." He gestured to the boy. "Finish your course." The boy stabbed the knife into the center of the bone. A deep crack echoed like a gunshot. Jonathan fell from his chair. Pain split through his mouth. He tasted blood, reached up, and felt something loose. His molars, 2 of them, gone. He spat. They hit the floor with a clink. He screamed. The room responded. The walls began to move, not inward, not outward, but deeper. Layers peeled back, like flesh cut with precision. Behind the first wall was another, covered in faces, all screaming, mouths open, eyes locked in agony. The faces pushed forward until they spoke. "Feed us." Jonathan crawled backward, but the floor grew soft. His hands sank. The faces rose. One of them was his brother, not as a boy, as a corpse. Water-yogged, lips split, tongue bloated. Jonathan, the face whispered. You left me. He cried out, I didn't know. I swear to God, I didn't know you were still inside. The waiter crouched beside him. There is no God here. He held out a bowl. Inside were teeth. Jonathan's, the ones he had lost. But now each had grown eyes. Tiny black eyes that blinked, watched. He screamed again. The boy across the table smiled. Somehow, even with the stitches, and then the stitches snapped, one by one. The sound was hideous, wet and stringy, like tendons snapping under pressure. The boy opened his mouth and whispered, Your turn. Jonathan blacked out. When he woke, he was back in his apartment. Or it looked like it. The lights were off, the windows covered, the air was still. Too still. He stood, his jaw throbbed. He stumbled to the mirror in the bathroom and stopped. The man in the reflection wasn't him. It was his brother, drowned, pale, lifeless. Jonathan screamed, but no sound came out. Only a laugh from inside the mirror. It echoed through the apartment, followed by the soft, unmistakable sound of chewing. Evelyn had stopped trying to escape. Somewhere between the third door and the fifth staircase that led nowhere, she realized the restaurant was not a place. It was a maze of her own making. Each turn, each corridor, each breath tasted like the past. Not the kind that fades into nostalgia, but the kind that stalks in silence, waits in corners, and smiles when the lights go out. Now she stood in a hallway that pulsed with quiet heat. The walls wept, not metaphorically, dark. Viscous tears slid down the faded wallpaper, pooling at her feet. They smelled of burnt fabric and lavender. A scent from her grandmother's house, the one that burned down when she was 14. Ahead, the sound of metal scraping on tile, a dragging sound, unhurried, predatory. She walked, her footsteps stuck slightly, soles clinging to the weeping floor. Each step released tiny gasps from beneath the surface, as though something below was exhaling in pain. Then the hallway widened. A kitchen, vast, abandoned, but not cold. The ovens were lit. The stovetops glowed. Empty cutting boards lined the counters, each one bearing a single small item, a torn ribbon, a tooth, a Polaroid photo of someone halfway through a scream. Evelyn stepped inside. The door closed behind her with a low click, and the temperature dropped. The smell shifted. Fresh metal, old milk, the kind of stench that lived behind sealed basement doors. The clinking began again. From the center of the kitchen, a lone chef stood over a preparation table, back turned to her. His apron was spotless. His hands were not. Blood dripped from between his fingers, pattering onto the floor in slow, careful drops. He chopped something with mechanical rhythm. Thunk. 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 She stepped closer. He didn't turn. The object he was chopping looked like a tongue. Too large, too human. It twitched every time the blade came down. Dash. "Whose is that?" she asked. The chef stopped. His neck turned, slow and unnatural. bones cracking with each degree. He had no mouth, no nose, only eyes, thousands of them, tiny, packed into every inch of his face. They blinked out of sync, like a field of insects crawling beneath skin. "You chewed on the lie," he said. His voice came from somewhere inside her head. "Now it's time to swallow." He slid the chopped tongue into a metal bowl. It hissed. Steam rose. The scent filled her lungs. Smoke, shame, and sugar. He pointed to the far corner. Another table, another tray. This one covered. She walked to it, hands trembling, lifted the lid. It was her old lunchbox, the red one with the chipped corners and cartoon sticker half peeled away. Inside, a sandwich, peanut butter and jelly. But the jelly was too dark, the bread too moist. She touched it. It bled. She remembered the school trip, the girl who had eaten her sandwich by mistake, the one with the allergy, the one who had collapsed while Evelyn watched, too afraid to speak. "I didn't know," she whispered. The chef didn't answer. Instead, he held out a spoon. It gleamed like it had never touched a hand before. "You knew enough," said the voice. Enough to stay quiet. Enough to watch her lips turn blue. The walls trembled. The light above buzzed. Somewhere behind her, something moaned. A long, deep sound, like hunger waking after years of sleep. Evelyn picked up the spoon. It was heavy, alive. She brought it to the sandwich and scooped a bite. It moved in her hand. The jelly pulsed. The bread writhed. But she lifted it anyway, to her lips, and ate. It tasted like the inside of a closed throat, like fear kept too long, like breath that never escaped. The moment she swallowed, the room shook. The chef turned fully now. His body was sewn together from others. Hands too many, legs mismatched. His apron split down the center, revealing a hollow cavity filled with pages, journal entries, test results, birthday cards. Each one burned around the edges. He stepped forward. The pages fluttered, a sound like moths trying to speak. "Your memory is the main course," he said, "but dessert is what comes next." The walls peeled away. Behind them, dining guests waited. Every one of them had Evelyn's face. Different ages, different expressions. All of them watching her, mouths sewn shut, eyes wide. The chef gestured. They stood in unison. The floor cracked. A whisper filled the air. Not words, but intention. Eat or be devoured. The ceiling split. Darkness poured in like ink. Evelyn screamed, and somewhere beneath that scream, she heard herself laughing. Jonathan stood at the edge of the corridor, breathing through his mouth to avoid the smell. The air was sour and thick, as if time itself had decayed. The walls had changed again, no longer veined with memory, but covered in receipts. Hundreds of them. Yellowed, curling slips of paper pinned like skin, each one inked with a name, a date, and a price paid. Some had red fingerprints smudged across them. Others were torn at the corners, still damp. One of them bore his name. He tore it from the wall. Jonathan Hale, state, continuous, coarse, guilt, bone deep, total, still owing. A chill raced across his shoulders. He turned to speak to Evelyn, but she was gone. He was alone again. Or nearly. The sound of something breathing in the dark rose like steam, heavy, uneven, gurgling between each exhale. Jonathan followed the corridor, stepping lightly. His feet slid slightly with each step. The floor had become sticky, resinous, like sap, or something worse. A single bell rang in the distance, soft, final. Ahead, light flickered behind a door barely held on its hinges. A sliver of something golden and trembling leaked through the gap. Jonathan pushed it open. Another dining room, but this one was smaller, tighter, intimate. No more than 6 seats at the round table. Candlelight cast elongated shadows on the cracked ceiling. There were no waiters, no guests, only one chair pulled out, and on the table a folder, a ledger, bound in leather and wrapped in twine. The moment he sat, the candles flared. The ledger opened itself. Inside were names, dozens of them. People he knew, people he didn't, each with a list beside them. Regrets, confessions, prices. Some were scratched out violently. Others were circled in what looked like fingernail marks. He flipped the page, found Evelyn's name. Her entries pulsed under the flickering flame. Left her mother alone, watched a girl die, fed silence when truth was starving. Then his own. Only 2 entries, but they glowed. Locked the door, never opened it again. He tried to shut the book. It wouldn't move. From behind him, the scraping of claws against wood. He spun. A figure stood in the doorway, not the waiter. Something older, taller. Its face was blurred, as if smeared by time. Its limbs were jointed wrong. Too many elbows, too many knuckles. It dragged a long chain behind it, every link made of cutlery. Forks twisted into hooks. Knives rusted and bent like broken teeth. The sound they made was unbearable. A metallic whine that crawled into Jonathan's skull. The figure spoke. Its voice came in layers. Whispers stacked upon whispers, like hundreds of mouths pressed against a wall. You've eaten. Now it's time to pay. Jonathan backed away. I didn't ask for any of this. You sat. You stayed. You swallowed. That's consent. The figure reached into the chain, pulled out a single spoon, bent backward like a snapped wrist. It placed it gently on the table. Then another and another. With each placement, Jonathan remembered something. The scream from the basement, the silence at the funeral. The first night he dreamed of water. And woke up choking. By the 5th spoon he was weeping. The figure stepped back. You cannot leave with debt in your bones, it said. You must settle your bill. The ledger flipped to a blank page. A quill appeared, dripping black. Jonathan picked it up. His hand moved before he could think. He wrote, I knew he was still inside. The moment the words hit the page, the room twisted. The walls peeled back like skin under boiling water. The table rotted, legs collapsing inward. The candles burst into smoke, and from beneath the floor, a low moan. Then a voice, Evelyn's, far away, afraid. Jonathan? He turned. The corridor was back. But now she was there, barefoot, shaking, clutching something to her chest. The ring, the diary, the receipt. It was all of them. I think they're done feeding, she whispered. A shadow moved across the ceiling. Not crawling, circling. Jonathan reached for her, but the corridor split. Walls stretched, floor cracked. The ceiling above them tore open like old fabric. Something enormous breathed in, a sucking inhale, as if the house was drawing them inward. Then, silence. They stood in an empty room. No table, no flame. The final course is never served. It arrives uninvited, and somewhere far beneath them, a bell rang again. Once, twice, 3 times, and the whisper came with it. Time to tip the chef. Evelyn was bleeding. The cut wasn't deep, but it wasn't from any blade she could see. It had appeared along her wrist the moment the bell rang a 3rd time. A thin, elegant line, as if drawn with a sharpened quill. The blood dripped in slow, deliberate beads onto the floor, which absorbed it hungrily. No splash, no stain, just gone. Jonathan stood beside her, hands clenched, face pale, the napkin with the stitched warning still crumpled in his fist. They were back in the corridor again. No noise, no music, just the whisper of something waiting on the other side of silence. I think this is the end, Evelyn said. Jonathan shook his head. This place doesn't end. It feeds. Ahead, the hallway split, left or right. No signs, no sounds, just 2 doorways, pulsing slightly, breathing. Evelyn stepped toward the left. Jonathan took the right. They stopped, looked at each other. Something unspoken passed between them. Maybe it was understanding. Maybe it was surrender. They split. The doors closed behind them soundlessly. Evelyn found herself in a narrow room, barely wide enough to stretch her arms. The walls were mirrored again, but this time they did not reflect her. They reflected people she had forgotten, a teacher she once lied about, a childhood friend whose name she never said again after she moved, a lover she ghosted, a nurse whose kindness she rejected at her mother's bedside. Each mirror whispered as she passed, not words, but their final expressions, their disappointment, their silence, their pain. She couldn't breathe. The air was thick with memory, hot and cloying like the breath of something dying. Then she reached the final mirror, and it was her. Not her now, a younger version, eyes wide, blood splattered, holding something behind her back. The reflection smiled and whispered, I never forgot what you did. The mirror shattered, not outward, inward. And the sound it made wasn't glass, it was bone. The floor beneath her trembled. A table rose, simple, bare. Only one item sat atop it, a cloche. She didn't lift it. She didn't have to. It lifted itself. Inside was a fetus, curled, human, breathing. The cord still pulsed. A fork and knife rested beside it. The room dimmed. A voice spoke from nowhere. You were pregnant once. Do you remember? Evelyn sank to her knees. No, she whispered. No. You chose silence. Again, you chose forgetting. Tears blurred her vision. I was young, scared. I didn't know what to do. But you did know. The fetus twitched, eyes opened. They were hers. "Eat," the voice said. "No." "Then be eaten." The walls groaned, the mirrors bled, and the child on the plate began to cry. The sound wasn't a baby's cry. It was ancient, deep, echoing from beneath centuries of dirt. A sound carved into the marrow of the world. Evelyn crawled backward, but the room followed her. The plate slid across the table, closer. The fork clinked, the knife shimmered. Then everything went black. Jonathan stepped into a cathedral, or what looked like one. The walls arched high into nothingness. Benches lined the aisles. Dozens of faceless diners sat in rows, heads bowed, hands folded. No one spoke. No one moved. But he could hear chewing, slow, wet. A podium rose at the far end. The waiter stood behind it, arms outstretched like a priest. "In this house," he intoned, "all debts are fed." A spotlight flared. Jonathan was beneath it. A table rose from the floor. On it, a plate. He was too tired to run, too numb to resist. He sat. The lid lifted. Inside the plate was his own heart, still beating, but not inside him, inside her. Evelyn. She was there, on the opposite end of the room, seated at another table. Her eyes met his. They were hollow, not lifeless, just emptied. The waiter spoke again. "You may leave, but only one leaves full." He pointed. "One devours." He pointed again. "One is devoured." The knives beside their plates lifted on their own. Jonathan looked down. The heart pulsed slower now, waiting. Evelyn whispered, barely audible from across the cathedral, "I'm sorry." Jonathan whispered back, "So am I." They lifted their forks. Then darkness. Not the kind that blinds, the kind that consumes. When the light returned, only one table remained, and only one chair was occupied. The heart was gone. The plate was empty, and the sound of chewing had stopped. The wind outside was still. The lantern no longer swayed. La Fine Gourmande stood silent, swallowed in fog thick as wool, its windows black, its door nothing more than a faded outline on crumbling brick. No footsteps marked the ground, no scent of burnt herbs clung to the air. Just a wall now, as if the building had never existed. Evelyn stood alone in the alley, one hand pressed against the cold stone. She had no memory of walking here, no memory of how she had left. Her clothes were soaked, but not with rain. Her fingers were red, the tips raw and split as if from scraping. In her other hand, something small and warm pulsed. Jonathan's ring, not hers, not the one she had once tried to destroy. This one was twisted, blood-stained. Engraved inside were words too faded to read completely, except for the last. Deserved. Her stomach twisted. She turned away from the wall, expecting to see the city waiting. It wasn't. The alley had become a corridor. Again, the same scent, the same candles, the same sound of silverware in the distance. "No," she whispered. "It's over. I paid." A voice replied. Not loud, not harsh, just certain. You tipped the chef, not the house. The waiter stepped out of the darkness, immaculate as ever. Porcelain mask, gloves, napkin over the arm like a funeral sash. There's always one final course, he said. You've eaten truth, memory, regret. But the last is choice. Evelyn backed away. The corridor narrowed. The walls pulsed closer. He held up a silver key. Take it, he said. One door remains. The one that never opens twice. Her mouth was dry. Her hands shook. What's behind it? The waiter tilted his head. Yourself. The key burned cold in her palm. The walls opened before her, like curtains pulled back for a final performance. A single door stood at the end of the passage. It was simple, wooden, carved with familiar grooves. A door to her childhood bedroom. The door she had locked one night long ago when her mother had screamed her name and she had hidden under the bed. Her hand reached for the knob. The air changed. Warmth, breath, movement behind the door, a heartbeat. Hers? Someone else's? The key turned. The door opened. Inside was a dining room, not twisted, not monstrous. It was beautiful, lit with candlelight. A table for two, one seat already taken. Jonathan. He looked up, not in horror, not in pain, just tired and full. Evelyn, he said, voice soft. It's just us now. She stepped in. The air was warm, clean, no blood, no rot, no whispering walls. A place outside the rules. He gestured to the other chair. She sat. There was no waiter, no menu, no threat. Only a plate, empty, and a napkin. On it, handwritten in delicate ink, "You are what remains." She looked at him. He nodded. No one leaves with everything, but we leave with something. The candles dimmed. The sound of cutlery faded. And from behind the door, a silence that would never break again. Evelyn leaned forward, closed her eyes, and waited. When she opened them, she was home. Her real home. Sunlight through curtains. No blood on her hands. Only the memory of taste. And somewhere far behind her, a door that would never open again.